Last night after church, we went home and had dinner, and then we watched our main family Christmas movie, Die Hard. And I was finishing this up while we were watching Die Hard, so some of that dialogue should happen to creep in. I don't know what happened. When you think about the Gospel of John, it soon becomes apparent that John was that guy. When I talk about John, of course, I'm talking about the author of the Gospel. We're not talking about John the Baptist, John the Apostle, necessarily. What about the author of the Gospel? We could use his street name. John the Presbyter, St. John. But scholars generally, when they talk about him, they say the author of the Gospel of John. And he was that guy. Because if you picture a marching band or a column of soldiers, and they're all marching together, they're keeping perfect time, everybody's keeping in step, it's in one solid line of motion. John was that guy in the middle of the crowd who was not quite in step with everybody else, and he was always trying to kind of maybe catch up a little bit, but he couldn't keep time and he couldn't blend in with everybody else. When everybody was doing one thing, John was doing something else. And we see this in the gospel that John left us. Because the other three Gospels, and we've talked about it before, they're called the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They all tend to do about the same thing. They tell about the life and the ministry of Jesus Christ. They all tell more or less the same story, and it's pretty obvious that the authors of those three Gospels all drank from the same well of experience. And it's possible even that they drank from the same literary well. Because there are scholars who believe that there is still another gospel, another document they call Q. And that even older document portrays the life and ministry of Jesus as well. And that one would predate the other gospels. Scholars believe that Matthew, Mark, and Luke most likely borrowed from that document when they wrote their own Gospels. Borrowed sounds better than plagiarized. But if you think about that, and this is what led the scholars to that opinion, when you think about it, it explains the underlying uniformity of those Gospels when you take into account the different personal viewpoints and personal experiences in there. The idea that there's some source document behind that really makes sense. So the Synoptic Gospels all probably have their roots in this Q document. Then there's John. John is kind of off by himself, wandering around. And John decides that he's not going to go with the conventional storytelling, because his confession of the Savior is going to be different. Whereas other writers focus on Jesus the man, Jesus the teacher and the preacher, the healer, John's going to delve more into who Jesus really is. And John wants us to know. And he wants to remind us right off the bat that Jesus is not just some prophet, some guy that God sent to us. John wants us to know that Jesus is God in a very real and mystical and mysterious way. And that's why John's gospel starts the way it does. John lets us know from the outset of his gospel that this is going to be something different because its subject is someone different. The subject of John's Gospel is unlike anyone else who's ever been. And if you think about it, the very opening of John's Gospel sounds maybe a little bit familiar. He starts out with 3 little words. In the beginning. Those are the 3 words that start out Genesis. And it's a deliberate choice, almost as though John is kind of taking the Bible and rebooting it. Saying, okay, we have the story before. We have the story of God's relationship with man before. And with the coming of Jesus, it's starting again. It's starting over. It's something new. We're going to start as though it was new. In the beginning. And John also lets us know with that beginning that the person he's writing about has a connection with creation. It's difficult for us to imagine. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. It's almost poetry. It's poetry with depth and meaning behind it. Genesis says, in the beginning, God created. John tells us that in the beginning was the Word. The Greek word actually that's used for word is logos. And logos doesn't just mean word in this usage. Because logos here carries a lot of other baggage with it. In the sense that it's used here, John means logos is the creative force in the universe. It's the way in which chaos is organized into the world and life as we know it. Logos is that part of God that enables and even desires creation and order. Think back to Genesis. Think of logos as that spirit of God that moves across the face of the deep and calls the world into being. So what's John telling us? In the first place, if you like that sort of thing, this is one of the places in the gospel where we get a fairly unambiguous, still mysterious, look at the idea of the Trinity. Because here we learn that Jesus, Logos, that Jesus was with God, and that he was God. So here we learn that Jesus is not a junior partner in the Godhead, but he is actually a part of it. That's one thing. And the second thing we learn is all the more remarkable because of the first. Because Jesus is a part of the Godhead. He is behind the creation of the universe. And yet Jesus stepped away from that. Jesus stepped down from that God place. He could be in the world. It's what we celebrate at Christmas time. It's what we celebrate today. John tells us that Jesus, the creative force behind the world, became a part of that world that he created. Jesus was born into lowly circumstances, to parents of no particular worth. In a land that was occupied and controlled by a foreign power. It can't get much lower than that. Now, 2,000 years ago. we're told that he brought a light to this world that shone in the darkness and could not be overpowered. It's a remarkable statement of what Jesus did. You think about it. From a human standpoint, why would he do that? And he had to know that being born the way he was, being born in the circumstances that he was, that was doing things the hard way. After all, he was the creator of the universe. He was the motive or the force behind the creation of the universe. He had his choice, infinite possibilities. He could have come as the heir to empire. He could have come as a son of wealth and influence. He could have just manifested one day in the temple and said, "Hey, here I am. I'm here to save you." Instead, he chose to start small. As a helpless baby. Parents who were all but helpless in the face of his. You gotta wonder. I did anyway. Gotta wonder if he did it to make a point. The point was that you don't have to be rich and powerful to make a difference. You don't have to be rich and powerful to influence people around you. You don't have to be rich and powerful to do good things. And maybe he also did it to show us that the only honest way to turn a heart toward God is by changing that heart. And not forcing it to change. Maybe the point to being born powerless is that power is not what life is all about. He wanted us to know that. Jesus was not about power, but he was about humbling himself in the service of others. Up to and including allowing himself. In fact, he wasn't allowing himself, he was practically daring others to arrest him and execute him. And even those times when he did exercise power, or he let power be exercised through him, performing a miracle, those were done for the purpose of helping others. Miracles of Jesus were never just to say, "Hey, look how powerful I am." They were to feed people. Raise somebody from the dead, to ease somebody's mourning, to heal. John tells us that Jesus was the agent for creating the universe, for creating our world. Jesus was that power that brought order out of chaos and set everything into harmony, and if humanity hadn't interfered after that, all would have been good. But humans, when we did come along, exerted our own will against the will of God, and we brought darkness, opposite of God's light. So the only antidote was to do something that would bring the light back, to bring the light to the darkness where it could vanquish it once and for all, and that's what Jesus chose to do. He began that journey in the stable in Bethlehem, and he ended it with a cross in Jerusalem, just a few miles away. Well, actually, he didn't end it on the cross. He ended it in the brilliant sunlight of Easter morning. And that also is part of why John is so different, because John wants us to know right up front why Jesus did what he did. Not so much what he did, but why. And it wasn't to fulfill a prophecy. It wasn't because God sent him and said, go do this. But because he came to put right the creation that had gone wrong. In a world that had become lost in darkness, he brought a light, and he brought a lifeline. And that added up to hope for all of mankind. You read the Gospel of John, and it can be kind of tough sledding. Because he's so different from the others. But on this Christmas day, I think we can content ourselves with knowing this. That in the dim past of history, humanity ripped itself away from harmony with God and has been struggling with that ever since. Struggling in the darkness. But God, not content to let us fumble in the dark forever, sent us a way home. He sent us a way out. A way that we can get back into the loving arms of God. And that way leads through the light of Jesus Christ. I pray that this Christmas and in the year to come, we'll all find ways to bring that light to the world around us. That we'll reflect the bright and the shining love of Jesus Christ to those around us, to those we know and to those we meet. And that we will feel the warmth and the light of that love in our own lives as well. Merry Christmas.